things and forensics on the Internet of Things and how it affects investigations in digital forensics. A little bit about me. My name is Jessica Hyde. My day job, I'm Director of Forensics at Magnet Forensics. Don't worry, this has nothing to do specifically with that. Before that, I worked as a contractor for the U.S. government for both Basis Technologies and American Systems, doing forensic things, and for Ernst & Young. Before that, I was in the Marine Corps. Oh, no Marines in the room, okay. I also teach mobile device forensics adjunct at George Mason University, where I did my MS. I am not going to stand behind the podium because you wouldn't see me. All right. So just a little bit about what we're going to go over today. We're going to talk a little bit about the Internet of Things. Really, really brief, I promise you. Then we'll talk about categories. Then we're going to actually start talking about data that we've parsed and recovered and some things I've helped on investigations on. And it's going to be pretty cool. I'm going to get pretty down dirty. It'll be nice and fun. But why not start at the end, right? So if you leave after this slide, it's cool because it's the conclusion. Now, the thing I want you to get out of here is that the Internet of Things is going to become more important in digital forensics, that there's a wealth of evidence to be found, and that that evidence is going to become more of a part of what we do, and why that is, and that if we don't start looking at data off of the Internet of Things, we're going to be missing a lot of information in our investigations because there's a lot that is there, and that it's going to more often be our suspect. And what I mean by that is any piece of equipment can play all three roles. It can be the suspect in a crime, it can be a witness to a crime, and it can actually be the victim of a crime. And we all know that our devices can be hacked and taken over. I'm sure Kat told you all about that earlier today, where the devices can become the victim. But in a lot of instances, the device can also be the suspect. So, start at the beginning. We need to define where we are with the Internet of Things. I'm not going to make you read definitions, but the whole point is here is we're talking about any object with an embedded system that's capable of collecting data. And it's really interesting, and I actually only included this because I thought it was fascinating, that the definition of Internet of Things, first time it's coined, was actually by a gentleman by the name of Peter Lewis, who was part of the Black Caucus Foundation in 1985, so it's actually a pretty long time ago, and his definition actually I believe is best. He says the Internet of Things, or IoT, is the integration of people, processes, and technology with connectable devices and sensors to enable remote monitoring, status manipulation, and evaluation of trends of such devices. And then he said, what I am calling Internet of Things will be far-reaching. This man was wise beyond his years. So why do we care about this? Well, we care about this simply because the number of devices, right? We have already succeeded the point where there are more connected devices than people. And by 2020, it is estimated there's going to be 50 billion connected devices. The trends as far as what people are predicting ranges from anywhere to 50 billion in 2020 to 1 trillion by 2015. No, we did not hit that number. That was a really bad estimation by IBM. But the whole thing is people are really all over the place. 78.1 million wearables were sold in 2015. How many of you, show of hands, are wearing a wearable device right now? A smartwatch, a Fitbit, anything. How many of you only have one piece of tech on you at this moment, just a smartphone? All right, put your hands down. How many of you have 2 or more pieces of tech on you right at this moment? Yeah, that's 90% of the room. So that's why this is important. By 2020, so in 2 years, it's predicted that each one of us are going to have 5.1 connected devices. If anybody want to guess how many I have in my home right now? 46. When I ran Thing on my house right before leaving, I had 46 things connected. I am not the average user, though. 2016, PwC did a survey. 45% of people own a fitness band, 27% a smartwatch, and 12% smart clothing. Before I started getting into IoT forensics, I didn't even know there was smart clothing. I really hope that smart clothing tells some people that it's time to wash it, but that's not what it usually does. It's usually more geared towards heart rate monitors. When I started getting into IoT forensics, I'll tell a quick quip. My husband actually was like, can you please pick a hobby that will actually help the house? And I said, yes, they make smart washers. And I finally won. My smart washer is coming on the 4th of June, which is Monday, and I can't tell you how happy I am. My husband is happier because it means maybe I'll help with the laundry just to create data. Look, everything else is done by robots, right? I've got the robot vacuum, I've got but there's also issues for security, right? So it's not just your home use. 25% of enterprise attacks are predicted by 2020 to involve something related to IoT. And when we're looking at the perceived benefit of a smart home, it's really, really interesting to think that 40% of people think this is helping them with security. Would you agree? Not really the best use of security, but it's mainly convenience, right? It's the real reason. And there's a lot of commercial applications that a lot of times people don't think about. People aren't thinking about the fact that logistics trucks companies are actually using IoT to monitor shipments. People aren't thinking about the fact that factories are using smart implementations, that machines, that everybody knows vehicles are, and we know what we're doing in the home, but we need to start thinking about how it's going to affect us. And why does this matter to us? Because of the artifacts and the data that's left behind. So we're going to be looking at a couple of things. We're going to be looking at smartphone data that's taken off of the paired app to the IoT device. In some instances, we're going to be looking at the devices themselves. In this instance, we're going to focus on 3 different areas today. We're going to pick a smart home device, we're going to pick a wearable, and we are going to pick something I like to call the category things that go, something in the automotive spectrum. And of these, the only one of these specific devices that I teared down the physical device and will give you pinouts for is the Echo and the Echo Dot. But based on most of my research across the spectrum, most of the useful data you're going to find lives in 2 places. It's on the paired app and the cloud. The devices actually tend to have less data stored on them, helps with size. So smartphone and cloud are usually typically going to be your best sources. So we're going to go over some categories, and it's really interesting where there are, because there's sometimes in places you don't think of. So there's actually a lot of bio information that's being controlled by IoT. Everything from heart monitoring implants, which have been used in cases to prove that heart rate isn't there, isn't elevated at the time it would, to biochip transformers on farm animals. And this is actually this case where this pacemaker, this gentleman in the UK, he set fire to his house and then claimed an insurance claim. It said, that his house had caught on fire. Well, they actually pulled the data from his pacemaker and discovered 2 things. 1, his heart rate did not elevate at the time that the fire was set up as if he had been scared. And 2, his heart condition did not give him the time to have packed as much stuff as he got out of his house before the fire got bad enough for him to escape. And it was questioned in court and it was allowed to be admitted. And it was $400,000 worth of damages, and the insurance company wound up not having to pay. There is some weird stuff, guys. There are electric clams that have sensors on them, right? So when you're talking about IoT, it gets weird. Automobiles have multiple built-in sensors, multiple cars. In bold here, things we're going to talk about, smartwatches and wearables. You guys are used to them, everything from your Pebble to your Apple Watch, to your Fitbit, to your Samsung Gear. But IoT is also being used in places that might be really helpful when there's wrongful deaths and weird things that happen. There's DNA devices right now that are monitoring food pathogens. There are IoT devices that are used in firefighters' uniforms to predict heat and degradation and notify them when they're in danger and when they have to leave and monitor smoke. There's smart speakers, which we're going to talk about. We're going to dig into the Echo, and it'll be fun. And then there's a lot of home automation. A lot of people are referring to this as smart home. This is everything like your Nest thermostat that's controlling temperature, to your smart refrigerator, to your smart washer that tells you when it's time to move everything to the dryer, to heating. We've got robotic vacuums and air purifiers. We've got vehicle infotainment systems we're going to talk a bit about. And then we have ovens, refrigerators, and freezers that use Wi-Fi for remote monitoring. And think about all the good data. Washers and dryers. I'm finally getting mine. So what my husband doesn't realize, and I don't know if he's going to watch this video, he's a pen tester, so there's a good chance. I just bought a $1,200 washer, and I'm going to take it apart. Yes! All right. So where do we find the data? I might have alluded to this before, but there are really 3 main sources of data in general, right, on the Internet of Things. You've got the thing itself, which may or may not store a significant amount of data. You've got the paired application, be it on the computer or a smartphone, and you have the cloud. Everybody loves the cloud. So let's kick it off and talk about some wearables. So I'm going to focus on one device at a time. Every single device that I'm going to talk to you about today, I have personally used in an investigation. The reason that I have exploited these devices was to help in investigations where I was assisting. So, first one we're going to talk about is Fitbit. So for those who don't know, Fitbit's actually been around for over a decade. So it's since 2007 out in California. And in 2016, they bought Pebble, which means they bought the good hardware, but they only didn't buy the hardware part. They only kept the software people. In 2017, they also acquired a smartwatch startup, VectorWatch SRL, so it sounds like they're trying to keep their competition in check. I don't know that specifically. But this is one of the most popular apps, and it has been used in several investigations, so I'm going to mention 3. So there was a woman who had claimed that she had been raped while house sitting. And as it turned out, she said that she had been asleep at the time, wearing her Fitbit. Of course she was, because she had to, track her steps. She claimed to be sleeping when someone broke into the house and took advantage of her and raped her. Well, as it turned out, her Fitbit proved that she actually trashed the house to make the scene and was up, about, and moving it, and was not asleep at the time, and it actually proved her allegation false. There was also a civil case where a personal trainer had made a claim about the inability to continue work professionally due to a health issue, and that they were no longer, that they needed workman's comp, and the Fitbit was actually used against the physical fitness trainer to prove that they were actually being more active than they were. And then this is a really interesting new one that I love. I mean, I don't love it. A woman died. Sounds horrible, right? But there was this murder that, anybody in here from Wisconsin? No. Okay. So there was a murder. This poor woman, Nicole van der Heijden, 31 years old, in the middle of the night, is taken out of her house, and she is killed. And she is killed by this man named George Birch. Some data from Google proves George Birch's location is with the body at the time of the murder. George Birch turns around, realizing that he has no defense to say he didn't do it and he wasn't there, and he said that Nicole's boyfriend, who resided with her, actually held him under threat of death and duress and brought him with him to kill her. Luckily for this gentleman who was erroneously accused, he was wearing his Fitbit and asleep. The data was recovered from the device and from Fitbit itself, and that data, we're going to talk about in a minute the why on this, showed that he was sleeping, but sleep activity is kind of questioned by the courts right now. But it also showed that he only took X number of steps, and that he took those steps at a particular period in time. It was about 20 steps, and it was actually when he got up to pee at about between 4 a.m. and 4:30. And because of the shortage of the amount of steps, that actually confirmed that it wasn't that he didn't have his watch on him. He hadn't taken enough steps to have committed the murder, and it wound up being his alibi and exonerated him in the instance. So let's talk a little bit about what the data is. So the first piece of data Fitbit has is profiles. And that's going to give you the user ID, name, birthday, profile image URL, and the height. What's important to know here is a profile URL will bring you to a picture. Of course, the person is choosing their picture, but it might give you some information. This is going to give you the name associated to the user, at least what they want you to, as well as their profile pic. The stride length here that is calculated could be of importance, but note that stride length is actually calculated based on gender and height and can be adjusted. So actually in the case I just mentioned, the police actually had the gentleman, because they used the stride length to determine how many steps he had taken. That's how Fitbit does it. So they actually made him put back on his Fitbit and take X number of steps to see if it actually matched. And it did. So good alibi and good work by the police department in validating, right? We got to validate and verify. It tracks your steps. Everybody knows this. But what you might not know is that it does it in 15-minute intervals, which is why I said he went to the bathroom between 4 and 4:30, because I actually don't know exactly what minute he went to the bathroom. What's very fascinating in this case is that Fitbit actually did provide data based on that user ID that was recovered. They were able to go to Fitbit, get a warrant, and get data. Fitbit provided data, and that data actually was to the minute, although I can confirm that on device, the data is stored in 15-minute intervals. So this is actually what you see. You see a start time and an end time and how many steps were taken in that time. So this can really help show a person's lack of activity, the time of activity, or a lack of inactivity. This is what, in the false rape case, got that thrown out because the woman had been up and walking around. So it really shows presence or lack of movement. It also can actually tell how many floors you've climbed. Now, as far as floors climbed, This is given on a day-by-day breakdown. So it's not minute by minute or hour by hour, but it tells you day. But this can be used to indicate overall activity for a day, as well as establish pattern of life, right? Really see a trend that people are taking from day to day. Now, one of the most important things that many Fitbits, not all, track is heart rate. And the heart rate, it actually gives to you in 5-minute increments, and it gives you the average heart rate over that 5-minute increment. So when you're looking at this periodic heart rate over that 5 minutes, you can use this to actually determine the amount of exertion. So kind of similar to what we were talking about in the pacemaker case. So 5-minute segments of time. And if you graph this over time, you can actually determine when somebody's doing different types of activity, and you can actually say whether or not they've exerted enough energy to have done something they said. Don't claim you were running a marathon when you were sleeping. We'll know. And on that side, there is sleep kept. Now, the sleep counter is particularly controversial. The sleep counter is not designed to measure exactly how many minutes you are laying down in your bed as opposed to walking around. The purpose of the sleep counter is to measure the qualitativeness of your sleep. So it is looking at other things, which is why this has been pretty much not accepted in court. But used in conjunction with activity moments, it could be used to exonerate you when somebody falsely accuses you of your girlfriend, right? That's always good. So, for example, here we see 205 minutes in bed, 5 minutes awake, total amount of sleep 198. So this might be good if somebody has sleep apnea for them personally, but from a forensics perspective, the data isn't as trustworthy and isn't being considered. But it could be a helpful indicator in something like the false rape case because there was no sleep time recorded at that period, just active time. And it can place someone at a specific time at attempting rest. But again, there's questions around that number of minutes, wakes, and asleep. Enough about Fitbit? Interesting enough? Want to learn something about smart homes? All right. So this is actually my favorite. This is my baby. This is the Alexa Echo system. Get it? Come on, I'm full of corny jokes. I actually approached Amazon and asked them if they wanted to use that, and you'll hear more about me approaching Amazon in a few minutes. They weren't too keen to it. They didn't think it was as clever as I did. All right. So the actual Amazon Alexa, we're going to talk a little bit about the app, has been around since 2014, but it took them 4 years to develop it. They spent a lot of time working on this. It's currently available US, UK, Germany, and I actually believe they finally got into Canada. Canada was interesting because they needed it available in French before it could go into Canada, and as somebody who's taken the data directly off the device, I know all the future languages. I'm not going to tell. All right, so it's a smart speaker that's voice-controlled when you use a wake word, right? Amazon, Alexa, Echo, computer, there's certain words you can use. Those are actually the 4. That's your choices. And it's capable of voice interaction, playback music, control other smart things. Yes, anytime I can tie one unsecure thing to another unsecure thing, that means more data for me. I'm like the anti-security person in the room, right? As a forensicator, I completely know that. It does run Fire OS on the actual device. Anybody who's familiar with Amazon should think that's pretty cool because that's what your Kindles run. So it makes sense that they're running that. But Fire OS is really just Amazon's version of Android. So here's actually the devices that I looked at. I've looked at the Show, I've looked at the Dot, first and second generation of the Tall Echo. So one of the things that makes the Alexa such a unique device in IoT is much like your smartphones, Amazon has opened up a store where developers can create their own applications for it. And as you can see, across 2017, they went from having under 1,000 to over 7,000. Anyone want to know how they did this? It's really, really smart. They went ahead, or maybe not smart, figure out in a second, they went ahead and said, you know what, we're going to, in these hot areas, we're going to start these classes. And we'll teach people how to build a skill. And we'll do a 3-hour class. Class is free. If you build a skill, you get a free Echo Dot. $30 piece of equipment. People who took this class have never programmed before in their life. But by the end of it, they write a skill. And they put it on the marketplace. And then the marketplace has more, and everybody only wants to go place with a more marketplace. Now, in your first 3 hours of coding that you've ever done, how much security were you interested in? Very good answer from the room. I mentioned the wake words, and I just love this story, so I'm going to share it real quick, which is that when in the UK, there was actually an ad that ran on a morning program where a little girl asked Amazon to buy a dollhouse, and all of these Alexas, Amazon Echoes, across the UK ordered the dollhouse. It was caught, they weren't delivered, it's okay. And then speaking of cases, there actually, I love this because this is a hot tub murder, because hot tub murders are awesome. No murders are awesome, please don't take this the wrong way. But there were two people who were found dead in a hot tub, and there was an Alexa in the space. And remember, Amazon is great. I have reported vulnerabilities based on this research with my research partner, Brian Moran of Brian Moore Labs, to Amazon. And some of the vulnerabilities we reported were fixed within 24 hours. We actually reported them at 5 p.m. They were fixed by 7 a.m. Tells you how bad they were, but they were fixed. Other things they fixed before the first presentation. I did an hour-long presentation with Brian, deep diving into Alexa. If you guys want information on that, I have it in the deck. They were great. So please take with a portion of salt what I'm about to say. The police department in this instance went to Amazon to request the data in a murder investigation, right? That's the kind of thing that we should give over data for. Amazon refused. Amazon refused on 3 occasions to turn over the data. Eventually, they gave the purchase history. That really isn't helpful. All right, so let's talk about sources of data. I took these devices apart. Yes! So we're going to talk a little bit about the devices. We're going to talk about the cloud, and we're going to talk about the app. So in my research, this is the Tall Echo. This has a 4 gig ultra flash memory. I was able to ISP this device. If you would like to ISP one yourself, there is the pinout. It's published, it's public. On the Dot was a little bit more of a pain in the butt because the eMMC was there's 2 different generations, and the eMMC on one of them had no markings on it, and there are no data sheets available for this Gen 1 or Gen 2, so a lot more testing on my end to figure out the pinout. Also, it's a much smaller device, no test pads, and you got to use 40 thousandths wire on this. But hey, I used it as an excuse to get a brand new JBC soldering iron that I love. Like, you guys want a good soldering iron? JBC makes an awesome one. Don't ask me how much it costs, so it's scary. So, my hobby's expensive. So there's the pinout for that if you want to pull data off of that. You can ISP either one of these using a RIF2 or an EasyRIF JTAG box. And if that's something you're interested in, see me afterwards. More direct directions will be in some write-ups I'm doing. What do you find on the device? Well, you can find some good information. You can find the Wi-Fi address. That can be useful. But what's really important is this string right here under user ID, right over my hair in the shadow here. It is at this location on the device, and that string is the keys to the kingdom. You'll see in a moment. We can get everything using that URL. Echo only stores 60 seconds of data on the device. So, if you happen to roll up upon an Echo at a scene that you need to recover, please do not go, oh, look, there's an Echo, or hey, look, Alexa, or Amazon, because you're going to say the freaking word, or even computer, because those are your 4 key words, and turn on the device and get rid of that last 60-second recording, which is probably the thing you care about. So don't do that, okay? Thumbs up. All right, so if you have done that, the data on the device is not of interest other than that string that we're going to get back to, but let's talk about what we can get off the application attached on the computer, on the phone. So from the mobile phone, we can get a lot of information. We can get user info, by the way, if you never had access to the device, and just the application that was paired to an Alexa, guess what? We get that same wonderful string. This string is amazing. Remember this string. There will be a quiz later. So, this is the string we care about, this customer ID, and you'll see why. Obviously, not for reaching back to Amazon since they don't share data. That's okay. So, there's some basic user info here, but that customer ID might be worth a warrant or subpoena. Not really the reason we care. Alexa tasks. So, I can recover this. Alexa tasks will actually give me different things that were said, as well as similar text, the created time, the last updated time. So I can get things that were added, for example, to the shopping list. I loved using my Alexa for a shopping list. By the way, in case you guys are wondering, I have several networks in my house. I had an entire Amazon ecosystem set up. I do not have any Amazon devices live in my house anymore. Okay? I do currently have a Google Home Live, but that is for testing purposes. What you're going to get for each task is this resource URL. This resource URL is great because if you just take that resource URL and select it, it will ask you to sign in. If you have the credentials, and hint, hint, most people use their Gmail and Gmail password for their Amazon account. Just happens to work that way. Usually can get it off their computer. You will actually get the actual recording will play. Now, this can be very helpful for timestamps, tasks that have been dictated by the user, and again, if you can get to the cloud and have those credentials, you can get the voice recording. There's also the Alexa web resource. This link here, this is going to give you other types of audio activity that isn't synced specifically with tasks. And this is great. Again, it's all time-stamped, and you can actually get access to the recording from the link in the cloud. My disclaimer, I had a note there, so I'd remember to say this disclaimer. Your authority to pull data from the cloud may or may not exist. So think about it before you do it. It is where most of the data is. It is where a lot of the data is in a lot of these instances, but there are specific legal implications. Please think about that before you proceed. Okay, so we actually can find the last audio is cache sound. So just so you guys know again, that's the last recording. It is in WAV format, and you can play it. Again, just the last recording. So if you either have the device or the phone, you can get the last 60 seconds. But again, if you're looking at the application, you can see that ID number everywhere. That's my favorite number. And it's important to recall this string if you pulled it from the phone. But wait, there's more. Amazon just added a new feature recently. Guys, this is an update I just put in the slides. You can now pull this string directly without ever having access to the device or the attached phone. All you need to do is log into anyone's Amazon account, your own included, go to Profiles, and go ahead and search. Actually, if you enter https://www.amazon.com/gp/profile, it'll ask you to log in, you get a search bar. You can type in anyone's name. When you type in their name, guess what happens? You're brought to their profile page. It could be blank if they've set it up blank for security reasons, but guess what that URL has? That ID. And I haven't even told you what that ID is good for yet. Well, guess what? You can take that ID number and plug it into any one of these lovely URLs. If you use any one of these URLs, you will get back all of the calls and messaging, all of the contacts, all of the devices, all of the Wi-Fi contacts. There's more, trust me. But basically, anything I can pull from the API, as long as I know that string, I can get it. You may or may not be asked for credentials. If you happen to pull this data down, #worst vendor rep ever. I work for a vendor that makes tools. Here's a plugin for Autopsy, which is open source, that Mark McKinnon wrote. It'll parse both Alexa and Casa data. So Casa makes TP-Link, makes a whole bunch of IoT devices that are integrated. I did briefly mention, it's not really part of this presentation, that there were some vulnerabilities found in Alexa during our research. There were also some vulnerabilities found in TP-Link, all of which were reported, things were fixed. Mark McKinnon, thanks for writing some plugins based on our research. This is actually how that cloud data looks if you pull that down. And I just want to provide, because if anybody wants to copy these slides, they can. At both the SANS Differ Summit and then updated research at OSDFCon last year, we did some presentations on this, and we get a little bit more into the vulnerabilities and the TP-Link stuff. So if you want to see that, just let me know. Things that go. It's my favorite new category of IoT because it includes anything from drones to self-driving cars to OnStar. Again, I'm speaking about things I've looked at in investigations before. So, OnStar has actually been around for a long time, since 1996, so over 20 years. Headquartered here in the US, in Detroit. It's a subsidiary of GM. And it's basically a subscription-based service for turn-by-turn directions, calls, etc. But it's available all over the world. US, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Europe. In Europe, it's known as Chevistar. I'm sorry, Chevistar in Latin America, it's Opel in Europe. And the reason that we care about this is over 6 million customers. So let's see what we can get off of this. There's also aftermarket. So even if you don't have a Chevy or a GM vehicle, it is possible that it has OnStar. And there have been some pretty cool hacks, right? So have any of you heard of PwnStar? So PwnStar was an attack that used man in the middle to actually be able to unlock vehicles or start them. And GM went ahead and patched this about 13 days after it came out. So there have been some attacks. All right, so OnStar, remote link. You can get the account information. Now, this account information is very valid if you get a phone that was paired with the device, and now you have a VIN. So if you didn't know what vehicle your particular nefarious actor was driving, you do now. And VINs are very powerful with DMV records. So if I didn't have your ID before, I do now. So this could be really important if you're going to subpoena or find an additional scene. Of course, there's timestamps for doing the registration. But if a VIN provides you details about about a vehicle you didn't even know was involved, that's money. All right. There's also hotspot information about what hotspot is released from there. It tells you the last time updated. It, of course, includes the VIN. So this can be extremely valuable because you can get some location-based information from that. And the password's there. And anytime I can get a clear text password, I'm all about it because I can use it other places. And again, you're going to get context in terms of having a timestamp associated with a MAC address. Anytime we can tie geo and time, that's great. We also get the recent places they've searched. So you can actually request a nav route via OnStar. So send me to Voodoo Donuts. And if I say send me to Voodoo Donuts in Austin, it's going to go there. You'll note that these are addresses in Waterloo, Ontario. It gives me a timestamp, and it tells me if the route was successfully sent to the device. Doesn't tell me if I drove it, but at least I know it's an area of interest, right? Because I get that succeeded. So this can be useful because you've got timestamp data that can put the vehicle or suspect wanting a desired location at a specific time. But what's more important is when it gives you directions, what do directions give you? They tell you the start point as well as the end point. So you don't know if the person took the trip, but you do know where they were at the time they requested it, right? You can also use this to identify patterns of life. So there are remote commands. Yes, I can use my OnStar to tell my device to do things when I'm not in the vehicle. And this can include things like locking the doors of the car or retrieving the Wi-Fi status. Now, what you'll notice is some of these are user-initiated and some of them are not. So diagnostics is sent from the motor vehicle company. We will not discuss the fact that headquarters at GM is requesting data from your vehicle. That's a little interesting in and of itself. Again, you're going to get the request ID, you're going to get the VIN, and you now know when somebody remotely requested to lock the door in the car. Again, you've got good time-related information, and the events themselves could be useful. If you have an instance where you're trying to prove somebody was in or not in a vehicle or somebody else was with them or not with them, knowing if doors were opened or not opened can be helpful. There's also places of interest that are stored, and the places of interest are nice and detailed and give you Latin long, and we love anything that does that. There's also this lovely address URL. So it's going to give you location information, which can tell you areas that the target might be interested in going in frequently because they're saved. You can also get the wireless carrier. Now, this is important for anybody. Has anybody here ever dealt with CDRs? CDRs are call data records. These are the actual records you get from the telco about communication with the device. Now, what you may not realize is that if you have OnStar, you've got an extra SIM in your vehicle. And with this carrier information, so knowing that this is AT&T, I can actually try to get these records from AT&T. Now, when I get these records with CDRs, guess what CDRs tell you? They tell you exactly which tower you were connected to. There's lots of tower mapping, and now you've got amazing geodata. Thank you so much. I love it, with a timestamp. So there is some basic info here, but it's possibly that additional subpoena target for getting call data records. Now we've got vehicle diagnostics. Now, maybe this isn't as sexy because it's just diagnostic information, like your last trip total distance. That one doesn't seem so diagnostic-y. It tells me how long you were driving your car your last trip, or how long it was till you set the odometer. But it's actually the trip itself. So not necessarily a smoking gun, but if somebody went to a lot of lengths here to establish an alibi, or say they weren't doing something or were doing something, or that they, drove to the grocery store, but their last trip was 500 miles, they might have gone a little bit further. We've also got just blank vehicle info, but in that vehicle info, we also get the account number, the year and make of the vehicle, etc. So if you thought the VIN wasn't enough to go on before, now you have more than just the VIN, because now you've got the make, model, and the phone number for that SIM card in the vehicle. So this is more ownership information, and it's going to tie a particular person to the vehicle. All right. So there are further things to research here and other considerations we want to take. In terms of those, again, I didn't do a lot of data diving into the data off device for the OnStar or the Fitbit. I'm pseudo-lying. I did take data off an OnStar several years ago, but it's not recent enough to have been part of this information. And to get that data off, a lot of times you may have to JTAG chip off or ISP, and that's going to take a little bit more extensive training and preparation and knowledge in order to be doing that. So it might not necessarily be in the same wheelhouse. If it is, even better. And in terms of data on the cloud, it's not the data there. It's, are you legally and acceptably able to get to it via your policies? The biggest issue with cloud is freaking amazing amount of data. Man, I mean, everything from O365 to looking at Google Drive and tasks, and like what I can pull off the cloud is crazy via APIs. Like, it is totally crazy. I'll give you a quick example. Google Takeouts, right? You all know about Google Takeout, right? You can pull your own data from Google. It's like your own personal retriever. For the My Activity stuff, if I pull that down, and I'm totally leaving IoT for a second, don't mind me, but the Google Home, I've been doing a lot of stuff with Google Home research, so I know I'm kind of leaving here for a moment. When you pull down Google Activity from Takeout, and it tells you what activity and what time. If I pull it via the API, it gives me geo for it as well. So sometimes there's more value to getting data directly from the API than just from the resource that you have, so I want to mention that. And what about these non-consumer related devices? I don't have a lot of access to devices inside human beings, like insulin pumps. I don't have a lot of access to smart grids. There are things I just don't have access to touch and to test with. And as encryption becomes better and better on smartphones and computers, since nobody seems to be caring about it on IoT, by the way, so everyone knows, every single thing I talked about today was recovered clear text. Okay? Every single thing was clear text. At most, I looked at an XML file. At most. Okay? So, some SQLite databases, all in clear text. Not even base64 encoded. Nothing. Okay? So, and if you want to ask me about the network traffic, see me privately afterwards. This talk is being recorded. So, as encryption grows in computers and phones, and IoT manufacturers are spinning up and not even having security departments, because some of the vendors that I've contacted in terms of my research have completely told me they didn't have a security department, offered to send me more free devices to beta test. I happily took them, but gave them no info. But I gave some of them info. But the point being that some of them now have security departments. That's important. There's also the hackability. Let's realize that, your Samsung TV can be watching you. There have been incidences, and I'm not going to get well into this, about, Samsung's having a hack where they could actually be used as a monitor into the room. Refrigerators being used as part of botnets. This particular botnet, you guys are familiar with Mariah, over 100,000 devices. And I harped a lot on companies that don't really give us the best security and don't think about security when they're setting up their IoT devices. And by the way, I do want to say again, Casa and Amazon were wonderful when I contacted them and when Brian contacted them, and they did fix things. But I'm always appreciate it when a company puts security at the forefront, and especially when it involves children. So this specific, Forensic Bytes did some research into this, and he reached out to these guys who make the Cognitoy STEM dinosaur, which is an IoT dinosaur that's used to teach engineering and math. And they actually publicly took a stance on both forensics and security, so I just wanted to take a moment to applaud them. They said that if they ever get a request from law enforcement, that they're going to aid in the investigation, but however, and do whatever they need to reconstruct the data. However, they have made a strong security posture and have made sure that data on the device is encrypted as well as what's being stored out, as well as the mobile app. So I just want to applaud a company that is both taking security seriously, but also taking their responsibility to law enforcement seriously when a crime is committed, especially when it could be a crime against a child or security and vulnerabilities against a child. So in conclusion, I want you guys to really know that IoT is important, that there's a lot of good evidence there, that this evidence has been used in court, that you can recover data, and it's going to become more of what we do in forensics. I don't care if you're in the corporate space, in commercial space, if you're in the government, if you're in law enforcement, you're going to see more and more of these devices because they're in use everywhere, right? They're going to be our suspect more often. If you're not thinking about the fact that a lot of these smartwatches have cameras, and the fact that your PII of your company, even if you have a BYOD policy where you've got an MDM and you're retracting all their data, and when somebody is wrongfully terminated, you're going through their computer, if you don't think they can't snap pictures on their watch, you're wrong, right? So who's thinking about that? So, at this point, I'd like to open the floor for questions. Anybody? Really? No questions? All right.
Gave us so much information.
Did such a good job.
Oh, ha, ha, ha. Well, thank you so much. If anybody has any questions or wants to talk about any of the network stuff or any of the vulnerabilities that I didn't talk about, I'm happy to talk about those off camera. Thank you. Have a great day.